we are pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Maddy Osman. Let's meet her.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Maddy. How's it going?
It's going great. Thank you so much for having me today.
Okay, great. Thank you. And let me say a couple of words about Maddy. Managing the Blogsmith, a B2B tech SEO content agency, is Maddy's job. Having a background in WordPress web design helps Maddy understand SEO and how to connect brands with relevant search customers. And she's also a very nice person. It's true. Maddy, could you tell us a bit about yourself and your experience and the topic we are discussing here? Guys, enjoy the topic and presentation. So I'm passing the mic to you, Maddy. Here you are.
Perfect. Cool. All right. Let's go to the next one. It has a little bit of intro details, so I can kind of jump in there. So thank you for that lovely intro. I'm Maddy Osman. I run the Blogsmith. We work primarily with B2B technology brands, a lot of brands in the WordPress space. And I would say that a specialty of ours is translating technical topics for the layperson so that they're understandable, so that they're actionable. And the other kind of, big role that I've taken on recently is that of an author. So I wrote this book, Writing for Humans and Robots: The New Rules of Content Style. And today we're going to talk about 5 particular rules that I have for content style in 2022 based on some of the things that I talk about in the book. And so really this topic, this presentation came from my own internal need to be able to scale my team, and the style guide was the way that I did that. So Elena, if you can go to the next slide, we can get into a little bit more of that journey that led us here today to this presentation, this book, and this process. So I started as a freelance writer, and that's what really kicks this all off, because I think most people are capable of doing a lot of things on their own, but it's when they want to start working with other people and they want to start scaling up that they really have to think about, well, why is it that I do it this way? And how can I communicate that to other people? So working as a freelance writer, I started to basically hit a limit of what I could do on my own. And I was actually talking to someone else the other day about just the idea, like, for example, if you're a masseuse, there's kind of a limit to like how many times you can give a massage before your body just starts getting worn. I feel like it's the same thing with writing. If you're creating a lot of content, if you're making sure that that content is high quality, you kind of just like hit a wall eventually of like how much creative power you have available, and the total amount of creative energy you have for your life or something like that. So anyway, I hit my limit. And I was starting to think about, well, what do I want to do next? So I was considering how I could kind of proselytize my writing voice. And I thought about creating a style guide. And I thought about moving from me as a freelancer to me as an agency owner, where I would be working with other writers, where I would be working with other editors. And so I slowly started to build up a team of writers where I was kind of their editor. And then in doing that, I started to identify a lot of the edits that I was making with these people who were incredible writers, but just had a slightly different writing style than I did. And so, creating the Blogsmith style guide was really a factor of wanting to systematize that process and just learning from working with other people and learning how my style differed. So then I hired an editor. I had a couple of writers, but then I hired an editor to kind of take my place, because I was becoming the bottleneck at each stage of this journey. And so I hired an editor. She helped me develop the Blogsmith style guide. I probably had some very rudimentary guidelines that I gave those initial writers. And then this editor worked with me to, again, define what is Maddy's unique style. And so we built out the Blogsmith style guide. And then as we sort of created this document, it started in one place. we continue adding to it. I mean, even today, probably yesterday, I just accepted a change to like our own internal Blogsmith style guide that one of our editors suggested after some back and forth. And that's something that I want to make clear, is that this is very much a work in progress. It's always, it's never going to be like done, and it had to start from somewhere. So if you take a look at the examples that I share in this presentation, like the Blogsmith style guide, I don't want you to get overwhelmed, because it's like a 30+ page document at this point. And so that's the result of many years of work and many different people playing into that. So my best advice for you, and just what I'm talking about right now, is really to just get started. And then just to kind of wrap up this slide, and then we can move on to the next one, is that it helped the Blogsmith scale to new heights. So having that document made it possible to hire more writers and more editors. So you might be wondering, okay, and I'm hearing some things that make sense, but why should you bother with proper style and systematizing your style? And one of the things I've probably already mentioned is just getting the team on the same page, those writers, those editors. It's identifying ways to be more efficient moving forward, so that we don't have to spend time on, first of all, the writer writing it, and then second of all, the editor identifying it and then sending it back to the writer potentially for edits. It just saves everybody a lot of mental energy. And I think when it comes to creative work especially, you kind of have to save that creative energy for where it really matters. So that's really the big thing for me. But I think there are a couple other excellent implications of creating a style guide. One is that it helps you demonstrate professionalism to your clients or to the audience that you're writing for. And it's really because you're creating consistency. And so the best way that I can explain this to you is, like, let's say you're looking at a company's blog, any company's blog. You read one article and then you go to like another article, something that catches your interest, and you're looking at it and you're just noticing these small differences. You might not even be able to consciously name what the differences are, but to give you some examples, it could be things like, well, the first article, the heading was in title case, but then this one that you're reading, it's in sentence case. And so it's like, it seems like such a minor detail, but if you add it up over time, and then now every article is inconsistent on that blog, it does stand out, especially if you are, reading a body of that work more than just one piece. Another thing that we'll talk about later is parallelism. So let's say you have a bullet list, and maybe one thing on the bullet list doesn't have a period at the end of that list, but everything else does. It's an inconsistency. And again, you may or may not like consciously notice it, but it's still there. It's still kind of like bugging you. And I think that's user experience in general with design on a website. The things that bug you are often not something that you can kind of consciously pick up on, but they do affect your experience. They do affect this reader experience that we're kind of talking about here. And so style just kind of gets ahead of that and says, this is how we do headings. This is how we do bullet lists. This is how we do visuals. And here's how we can be consistent. Because I remember before I had a style guide, there were a lot of times where I'd be writing for a client and I'd be like, oh man, like, yeah, what is it that they do for this? Another thing that's just kind of like a fun fact, I guess, about clients that we work with is some of them prefer the symbol for percent, and some of them prefer that we write out the word percent. So that's just another thing. And it's important to keep those things straight. And rather than go into a previous piece to try to find an example, it's a lot easier. It saves a lot of mental energy to just have a style guide that I can say, oh, yep, this is how they do percents. Okay, yep, this is how they do headings. And then, I can create content without worrying about all those little details. And then the last thing that I'll touch on right now, there are certainly other reasons to bother with proper style, but it's to effectively reach your target audience. And what I mean by that is that there are aspects of style that you can affect to make your brand distinctive. One thing that we'll talk about today is how to define tone of voice. I think that's really important for any brand to do and to just be upfront about when they're writing, because it's a lot harder to edit for tone of voice after like a final content piece, a final draft has been submitted. And then another thing to think about in terms of that are things like content readability, the Flesch reading ease scale, for example, which measures kind of like the grade level of reading of a piece of content based on how many syllables there are and the average sentence length, I think, of words. So it has like an algorithm, but basically at the Blogsmith, we try to target for about 7th to 8th grade reading level. And doing that helps us to write for this internet audience that skims your audience. Maybe you're writing for an audience of PhDs, so their reading levels maybe going to be higher. The point is that you want to know who your audience is and you want to adjust for it. So you want to operate off the best practices, and then you want to make sure that they're relevant to your specific audience and who you write for. So let's go to the next slide here and just kind of talk about like who are these guidelines for? Like, who is this presentation today going to be most relevant for, most useful for? I think there's at least 3 distinct audiences. One is just freelance writers who work with clients. It's also, to some extent, or to a great extent, I would say, content managers and anyone really who works in-house with other content team members, because truthfully, these guidelines are useful even if you're just creating content for yourself, which is the last point here, and you just want to be consistent within what you're creating on your one-person team. It's just as useful and maybe even more useful when you are working on a team with multiple people, that again, you want to be on the same page and you want to reduce edits that don't have to happen because you have clearly defined rules. So let's go to the next slide then. And this will be about my definition of a style guide. So my definition is that a brand style guide is a reference that your writers and editors and your clients can use to understand how and why to do things a certain way on behalf of the brand. So there really are a lot of stakeholders who can benefit from you just clearly defining these rules that you have for the content that you create. And, you know, you might be surprised to see clients on there too, but whenever we work with a new client, we're always sending them a link to the Blogsmith style guide, because we want to know if there's anything that vastly differs from how we do business. And I'll say that when we work with new writers, when we work with new editors, and when we work with new clients, I'm not expecting any of them to have the style guide like memorized or all figured out from the get-go, especially because it is a 30+ page document. People say that style guides are really more for like the editor than the writer, because it's that final reference point and it's kind of that final polish. Regardless, we want all of them to be aware of it. And then even clients, I think that defining the difference between like the Blogsmith style guide and a client style guide, it happens naturally over time as we identify the edits that they make. And so to some extent, when you are working with, let's say, multiple style guides, maybe you have one, but maybe you're also working with clients as a freelance writer or agency, you know, there is some work that you have to do to kind of reconcile the differences and be a student of their style. And I think it's just a matter of recognizing those things as they happen. So let's go to the next slide. And let's see, what are we talking about next? Content mediums. So another thing that's worth mentioning here is that the Blogsmith, we have one style guide, the Blogsmith style guide, that kind of is overarching for just about any type of content medium that we would write for, including many of the ones that I've mentioned here. Things like email sequences, blogs is kind of like the main type of content we create, ebooks, you know, web page copy. We actually do have a separate style guide for social media. And the reason why, although a lot of the rules on the Blogsmith style guide have crossover and are relevant to that, I think it's worth noting that if you write for multiple different mediums and there are nuances that you want to respect about those mediums, I mean, for an example, on email sequences, you have to think about subject lines and how to write those effectively. And that's a little bit different than, say, for example, a blog. You have to still write a title for that, but there are different rules, there are different character counts, there are different best practices. And the same thing goes on social media, because compared to blogs, for example, when you're writing for social media, you have to be aware of those character counts. You have to be aware of things like extra platform things that you could benefit from, like hashtags as a way to sort of index your content. It's also visual guidelines, the dimensions that are going to be most effective for you to show up in each news feed, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And even things like emojis, you're more likely to probably use those on social media than in a blog. Of course, there are exceptions to that. There are many brands that have incorporated emojis into things like their table of contents, or even naturally within blog content. But what I'm saying is, don't get overwhelmed. Start with one that can apply to many different things. But then as you figure out where members of your team perhaps need more guidance to give you something that you want without multiple rounds of edits, then that's when you want to think about maybe having a separate style guide for different mediums, or even a section of your style guide that addresses those specific use cases. So let's go to the next slide. And then I think we're kind of officially almost getting into kind of the meat and potatoes here. I wanted to, before we do that, just talk a little bit about this sort of like humans versus robots, like the title of my book, the title of this presentation, and what are we talking about when we talk about these two sort of users? So humans are the most important. They're the ultimate buyer of whatever it is that you're going to sell. And because they are human, they respond to human empathy, the efforts that you make in your marketing to appeal to their emotions and their needs and their wants. Whereas robots, also important to appeal to them, but it's important to realize that they do not have the ability to buy from you. They are not sentient at this point, so they can't make purchases. And they're just not the ones that we're trying to convince about anything. What they do help with is connect you with your ideal human audience, at the right time, ideally, when they're searching for something like what you offer. And so what robots respond to is descriptiveness and intent matching. And so I just want to make it clear, we are not optimizing for the robot. We are looping the robot in as a medium to appeal to this end human and really to reach them more than appeal to them. So we'll talk a little bit more as we go on about like the nuance between these content rules and like what applies to humans, what applies to robots, many of them applying to both. And that'll make more sense kind of as we go on. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And I think, we're officially kind of kicking this off. So let's go to the one after this, and we'll kind of kick off our rules here. So our first content rule is to just define your distinctive brand voice, because that is how you make content truly yours. That's one way to make content sort of stand out, regardless of if you even use visual elements. You want to create a brand voice that if people read it, that if they know you, that they can identify that as yours. And it's obviously easier said than done with certain things, like if you have a big brand, like I always talk about Wendy's being snarky, and it's like easy to, even if you didn't see like on Twitter that it was Wendy's tweeting about something, if you see a snarky post, you might assume it's them. So obviously it's easier said than done with like those big brands compared to the little guys out there. But I think the things that we're going to talk about are going to still ring true, really, regardless of the size of the brand that you're creating content for. So let's go to the next slide and we can kind of dig into what this all really means. So the Nielsen-Norman Group, there's a source linked here that I would highly recommend reading through, kind of digging in, learning a little bit more. But the Nielsen-Norman Group is this consultancy concerned with user experience, and they came up with these dimensions of tone of voice and these spectrums, these 4 spectrums that you see here, after basically going through many dozen other words and kind of filtering them into these high level characterizations. And so every brand should go through the practice of defining on these spectrums where their brand lies in terms of things like funny versus serious, formal versus casual, respectful versus irreverent, and enthusiastic versus matter of fact. So this is something that in the Blogsmith's intake form, when we're working with a new client and we're trying to determine how to nail their distinct style compared to like our own internal Blogsmith style guide rules, we have them fill this out. And there's basically like 5 radio dots. There's like the 2 extremes, funny versus serious. There's like in the middle, it's kind of not either, it's in the middle. And then there's a dot like in between that middle dot and the extreme. So it's like sort of funny, sort of serious. And so I think that doing that is a great start. I would highly recommend that you undergo this own exercise yourself if you haven't already. And then I would challenge you to then take it one step further, because while these guidelines capture the high level thought of what is true for your brand, what it doesn't capture is nuance. So going back to that Wendy's example, they're kind of like snarky or sarcastic, which is neither really funny or serious. Maybe it's kind of in the middle, but it's different. It's a different word. And again, like going back to that Nielsen Norman, like their explanation of how they came up with these words, it's like, I think they recognize it's not going to capture nuance. It's not meant to. And so you have to do that for yourself by kind of further defining the adjectives that describe your unique brand, in addition to these spectrums and the extremes that make them up. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit also about just like language in general, because that's part of, I think, being a distinct brand, and also just taking care with how you address your audience. So a couple, I think, quick wins for using thoughtful language with your audience are to, first of all, just consider how you can be concise and how you can cut fluff. We share a lot of guidelines for that in my book, Writing for Humans and Robots. I would say that the book, The Elements of Style, is also like a timeless resource for this, really, like regardless of how sort of the world changes in this like digital landscape. That The Elements of Style was written in 1918, I think. So they couldn't have, foreseen the beast that the internet would be. And the fact that it connects us all globally. And so it's connecting all these different cultures and languages and ways that we communicate with each other. And so you have to kind of think beyond even just like your own culture and kind of the norms of communication within your culture, because you are, whether you intend to or not, addressing this wider global audience by the nature of publishing content online. Even again, if you're like doing local SEO and you're trying to kind of reach a certain audience, it doesn't matter. People beyond that audience are going to find it. And so I think you have to ask yourself, how do I want to show up even to people who aren't my audience? How do I show up in a respectful way? So anyway, going back to my points here, one, I'm going to give you a couple examples for each of these points, or I'm going to give you one example for each point. So to be concise, think about words like simply or just. They don't add value. So to give an example, if you were to say something like simply open the app, it's better to say open the app. Just cut the simply, cut the just. Another thought here is that strong verbs, they're more to the point than adjectives. They say more than adjectives alone. So the example I can give here is, instead of saying something like we're very excited, it's more effective to say we're thrilled. It's shorter, it's more concise. Thrilled is more specific of an emotion than very excited. And so again, it's just thinking about how to be effective with language. And then the last point here really is about that global audience that you're addressing, intentionally or unintentionally. And it's about using inclusive language. So for example, one thing that we talk about in the Blogsmith style guide, we actually have a section all about inclusive language and plain language, and just, how to effectively communicate with everyone. And within that section, we talk about using people first language. And so an example of that is, instead of saying something like that blind person or something, you would say like a person who has seeing issues. I'm trying to think of exactly how I said it in my slides, but it's not starting with like a condition that they have, like something like an access issue that they're dealing with. It's talking about them as a person first, and then describing, whatever descriptor is relevant to them next. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide here. And we're just kind of wrapping up on word choice in general and being thoughtful about it. So a couple other kind of from the flip side, we talked about what to do. Here's kind of what not to do. So words that insult the reader's intelligence. This is something that a previous editor said to me, and it really stuck with me like many years ago. We discussed this, and I had said something like, obviously, and then whatever my fact was that I had written. And the editor told me, you know, you don't really know another person's experience. And beyond that, they're coming here because they want to learn something. And so it might be obvious to you as the person who's writing it, who has a good understanding of the subject matter, but to them, you're almost telling them like, hey, you're dumb for looking for help. And of course, like, you never want to make somebody feel like that when you're writing for them, because the whole point of creating content, at least as far as I'm concerned, is to provide a great reader experience. And I don't think you can do that if people feel insulted. So that's one that really stuck with me. Another thing is just making sure that the terminology you're using is descriptive and not unintentionally hard to follow. So words with ambiguous meaning, something like many, is a lot less clear than 50% of students or something, for example. And then the last thing, and it kind of relates to this first point about like clearly, obviously, is words that don't add value. So like fortunately, I see this all the time. And honestly, it's just like, it's the same thing with obviously or clearly. Like, how do you know what is obvious or clear to them? How do you know what's fortunate to someone? You don't know their experience. You shouldn't try to act like you do. You shouldn't make assumptions. And so that's why we cut these words in the Blogsmith style guide. And I see that we have a question. I think I'm going to save those till the end for now, but keep them coming so that we can knock those out when we get to that point. So Elena, let's go to the next slide here. And this is like one of the last points on this content rule. And we've talked about this, the flush reading ease scale. And so just another way that you can effectively communicate with your audience is to consider readability. I won't like spend too much time here because we've already touched on it, but this algorithm, this equation here is kind of like the back end measure of readability. And so as you can see, it's based to some extent on average sentence length and the average number of syllables per word. So if you want to put this into context, it's something like the word anti-disestablishmentarianism is probably something that will perform pretty badly on the flush reading ease scale in a sentence and as part of like, a bigger piece of content. So you always want to be thinking about simple language, and that kind of goes along with what I was talking about before with the cutting, being concise, getting to the point, and all that. So let's keep moving forward with the slides. And we're now going to talk about another content rule, which is about parallelism, which I started to allude to earlier, and it's going to make a lot more sense when we dig in here. So content rule number 2 is to just think about consistency and create it in terms of formatting and parallelism. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll give you a little bit of an example of this. So I want you to take a moment here to just look at this example. I'll probably give like 30 seconds after I stop talking. And I want you to try to identify how many instances of parallelism are in this example. And to just, in case that question is hard to act on, think about what I said earlier about bullet points and how in the past I've seen examples when going through edits where maybe one of those bullet points didn't have a period. And so it's no longer parallel at that point. So I'm going to give you like 30 seconds. I want you either in the chat or just on your own, try to see which elements you can pick out of this example that are parallel. And then I'll give you all the answers after you're done. So give you a few seconds here. Take a sip of tea. All right, we're going to keep this moving. So let's go to the next slide. And I might have you jump back and forth a little bit. Maybe after I explain them, we'll go back for just a moment so people can see kind of what I'm talking about in the answers. So I found at least 6 examples of parallelism in that previous bullet point example that was an example taken from an article that we wrote for one of the WordPress brands that we write for. And it was kind of like a how-to article, you know, how to achieve some particular end. And so it's a pretty common scenario for us. And again, it's just something that we have to be very cognizant of. Are we hitting that consistency and parallelism? Because again, if we aren't, then subconsciously, I think people pick up on that, even if they can't consciously recognize that it's not parallel. So here's the answers. The label, so the first one is that the label for each step always has bold formatting. That's step 1, step 2, step 3 was all in bold. And then 2, each step is labeled to show that it's part of the same sequence. So again, kind of the same idea. Step 1, step 2, step 3. And also they're all followed by a colon so that it kind of separates that step from the actual aspect of, you know, what the step is involved with. So then 3 is specific user face elements, which the reader is instructed to interact with, also have bold formatting. So we'll go back after I go through all of these so you can see, but it's something like, I think the example is talking about different settings. And so there's like a reading setting, and like the reading one is bolded. 4 is the word following the step number is an action verb. So they're all like, step 1, do this. And instead of like things changing where you're kind of like changing tense or using like a noun instead of an action verb. So that's another, I think, very important element of consistency. And another way that that kind of plays out within our own content, I think, is in talking about like a table of contents. You have the title, and then you have kind of like your subheadings. And if the title is like how to do something, then it's like each subheading kind of has to follow the same structure as being like part of this topic. Easier to explain probably with an example. But anyway, let's keep moving. 5 is the text after the colon is all capitalized. So it's just consistent. I don't think it matters either way if it's capitalized or not. Actually, AP style may say that it should be, but the thing that matters to me is that it's consistent. And then finally, each bullet point ends with a period. So if we can go actually back in slides just to show people now that they have the context of that original pop quiz thing, and then we'll move forward after that. So if you can go back to slide 16, I think, the one right before this, then we'll move forward in a second. But just so you can see, so like again, like the settings in reading is bold, all of them have periods, all action verbs, all capitalized after the colon. You kind of get the idea. So let's go 2 slides forward now. And I think we're on our next content rule. So we're getting through. We have 2 more after this, and we're running a little low on time. So I'm just going to kind of speed through. So the content rule number 3 is to spell brand names with care. And so let's go to the next slide because that'll help to make sense of it. One of my favorite books, How to Win Friends and Influence People, honestly, like top 3 book I've ever read, by Dale Carnegie. And he has this quote that it's very pervasive, like throughout the book, that he thinks about this a lot, because the book's about, if you haven't read it, relationship building and sales to some extent. So anyway, he says, a person's name is to that person the sweetest, most important sound in any language. And if you're like me and your name is literally spelled in your email and then people still get it wrong, like mine's Maddy with a Y, but I get like with an IE, or I get Maggie or Mandy, and it's like it's literally in my email. I don't know how you can mess it up, but people still do. If you've ever been mad about that, then this quote should speak to you. And then let's go to the next slide, because that should speak to you even more, and it should make sense why this is important. So let's apply this not to human people, but to the brands that you write for and about. I want to give a couple examples of where I've seen brand names, very popular brand names, spelled incorrectly in terms of, in this case, the casing. But brand names, you know, you have to think about things like punctuation. Is there spacing? Is there, you know, a period? Is there like, you know, special spelling in terms of the casing, like what's capitalized, what's lowercase? There's a lot to think about when spelling brand names. And so you want to be very thoughtful about how you put them in the content that you're publishing, because if you spell a brand name wrong, even if it's technically all the letters or something like that, it still might reflect badly on you in terms of being a consistent person who creates high quality content. So let's just run through these examples. WordPress, it's a capital P. I see people spell it with a lowercase p all the time. People in the WordPress community really hate this to the point that they made a PHP function that you can install on a WordPress site that automatically corrects the capitalization whenever WordPress is spelled incorrectly. So that's a big one. HubSpot is another huge one. I see people spell it with a lowercase s all the time. Go on Twitter, you will find an example in minutes in any conversation about HubSpot. What's interesting about WordPress and HubSpot is two brand names that are kind of lumping like two words together to make their brand name and then capitalizing the first letter of the second word. It's interesting that they don't inform the last example of MailChimp, which is frequently spelled with a capital C. It's actually a lowercase c. So all I'm trying to tell you is to like go to the source. Sometimes the source is actually wrong, so that's what makes this kind of confusing. But when I'm trying to validate the right way to spell a brand name, I usually look, first of all, in the footer of their website. Second of all, I'll go to like a social network like Facebook or Twitter and see how they're spelling their name there. And then if all else fails, or if you see inconsistencies, it might be a good idea to reach out to the brand and say, hey, how the heck am I supposed to spell your name right? And also you might want to update it online. So let's go to the next slide. And I think our next rule, which is to skip the free stock images. And so I have a lot of examples. Let's go to the next slide. I have a lot of examples about what you could do instead. I want to start again by kind of giving an example of like what's wrong. If you've ever seen this image before, I know I've seen it on like 80 different websites or 80 different brands, social media sites. I saw it recently on like a SaaS tool I use as their hero image on their homepage, like one of the most impactful spots for trying to get action conversions and all that. And all I could think about was how this image is not distinctive of anyone. It's not distinctive of any brand because any brand could use it because it's a free stock image. So let's go to the next slide because I have some ideas for what you could do instead. And we can continue going to the next slide because I'm going to show you some examples of each of these. But there are a lot of different visuals that you can use in order to be effective. Premium stock photos, first of all, are way better than free stock photos just because the fact that you have to pay for them means less people are going to use them. But let's go to the next slide and I'll just like kind of quick hit some examples. This one's not going to show up, but just assume this is like an animated GIF. GIFs are great if they are relevant to your brand voice. So if you're like funny, if you're irreverent, that tone of voice scale that I showed earlier, a GIF might be a good fit for you. If you're professional and formal, a GIF may not be a good fit for you. So make sure it's relevant to you. Even if you are more of like that professional, formal voice and tone, you could still use GIFs if you have like a SaaS product and you're trying to show like a how-to, like a quick animation about how to do something that would be relevant, but you wouldn't want to do like a SpongeBob meme, like that's not going to be on tone. Let's go to the next slide. And again, these are just kind of some like quick hits. You can also embed YouTube videos. I think it's worth noting that they don't have to be videos that you created. It just has to have some relationship to the material that you're talking about, to the subject that you're talking about, and something maybe that can like expand on it that doesn't make sense to like get into in the text of the content. And what's great about videos is that they increase your time on page. So it's it helps with engagement, I would say. Let's go to the next slide. Just a couple more examples for you. Branded statistics are great. And I think one of the reasons why I'm suggesting all these different visuals, in addition to the written copy that you create, is because people have different learning styles. And statistics for me make numbers understandable because if I see them just in text, it doesn't make sense to me. My brain like can't comprehend that. But if it can if my brain can comprehend data as it relates to other related data points in a visual like this, then I understand things a lot quicker. Visuals are quicker to help people understand things as a general note. Let's go to the next slide here. And another thing that you could do, and something that the Blogsmith does, just depending on the nature of the topic, are expert roundups, where we'll interview subject matter experts and then feature them. And one great way to kind of almost like say thank you for their efforts, but also make it more compelling for them to share that final content piece, is to create some branded images. And it's a matter of like adding their headshot, their title, maybe the company they work for, and then their quote, and doing it in sort of an on-brand way. So let's go to the next slide here. This is just one example of how you could do it. Another visual that you could add are examples. So like this example here, the text and the visual were from an article that we wrote for a WordPress brand about your first purchase email, like what you get in that email and how you can make it more than just like a confirmation of the order. So adding examples makes it unique, I think, and then it just makes it easier to act on because it gives that visual. So let's keep going to the next slide. I think I have one more image here, and then I think we're on our last content rule. So sharing screenshots with annotations. I think like we use this all the time for the WordPress brands we write about, again, because we're kind of sharing like how-tos, like where you need to go exactly. We want to like effectively help people without leaving any room for ambiguity or for misinterpretation. So that's something that screenshots and annotations help with. I really like Cloud App for this, but there are plenty of other tools you could use. So let's go to the next slide here. And we're almost at the end of my visuals. I just wanted to give a lot of visual examples because I think it's hard without having examples to think of what you could do without instead of stock photos. You could also we work with designers, like a design pickle. And so it's just like, maybe in addition to trying to use these other visuals, maybe you just hire a professional. If you're producing a lot of content, I think this makes a lot of sense, as we are. And so any client that works with us benefits from our design agency partnership. And then we also recently hired some designers internally to create these on-brand images. And so this example is actually also because we try to avoid creating tables within our blog or webpage copy projects, because tables, there's like, I can't say for sure that it's like a deprecated SEO element, but we just try to avoid it. So if somebody creates a table in the article, we basically just create a visual for it to represent it in the article. All right, let's go to the next slide. And I promise we are almost done here. Okay, so this detail is just about thinking about the robot side of things. Is screen readers are something that people with access issues would use in order to understand what an image is about. And so you want to be thinking about using descriptive keywords for those for how you're talking about images within your content. And so it's like weaving your keyword in, but also describing the image. That's really important for robots so that they can help the humans that the robots exist for, and also Google. And so it's a matter of like adding your keyword and the description to these key signal areas: image title, alt text, and file name. So let's keep going to the next slide. And let's talk about this last rule here, which is considering robots when writing titles for humans. So let's go to the next slide. I have a couple of different things to think about in order to do this. The first thing is to use tools like headline analyzer tools. So this is the CoSchedule headline analyzer and the share through headline analyzer. Both are free. The CoSchedule one, I think you have to share your email. It's gated, but basically you can kind of feed it a title, and then it gives you feedback about kind of like, these are like the emotional words you're using, and these are the power words, and like here are some like specific ways that you could make it better. And so I think this is one way that robots can help humans to be more effective, kind of taking your inputs and then making them better. Let's go to the next slide then. And a couple other ideas. From more of the SEO descriptiveness side of things to write compelling titles, my suggestion to you is to consider using some relevant information brackets. Like you could talk about like if the piece of content has like an infographic or a video or a podcast, these are just ways that I think make articles a little bit more compelling to click on versus like not having these information brackets. If you're writing like a review that has like an affiliate link, you might advertise that you have a certain percentage discount code to make people want to click your link over someone else's. And then if it's like the best, the top SEO rules for 2022, then you might want to add this next info bracket about, recently updated for specific month, specific year. And then the last one's like, do you have any sort of like takeaway that they can take beyond the article? Like if you have a downloadable checklist or template. So those are a couple ideas. Let's go to the next slide. And I promise I'm almost done and I'll take a couple questions. I think that it's also useful to look at, in addition to your SEO tools, some people, don't necessarily have the budget to pay for an SEO tool every month. And if that's the case, and even if you are using an SEO tool, as part of the Blogsmith SEO process, we also look at Google data. Google autocomplete are great ideas for either expanding your topic or other topics to think about. You plug in your primary keyword and it gives some suggestions based on that. People also ask are great questions to answer within your content. They're great things to think about when you're thinking about kind of like the structure of your content. And they can also be great featured snippet opportunities if you're familiar with that. And then finally, the related searches are kind of like autocomplete. It's using different keywords because autocomplete kind of expands on like your long tail keyword and just adds onto it. Whereas related searches are like different phrasing, but like similar topics. So again, it's like stuff to think about within your content piece or something to think about for a related content piece. So let's go ahead to the next slide here. And I swear we're pretty much done. Let's go to the next one and then I'll finish off on questions because I want to share just a little bit about the book. So Writing for Humans and Robots, that's kind of what we've talked about today. That's what this topic is about. And that's what my book is about. Writing for Humans and Robots is really just an expansion of the Blogsmith style guide. But instead of just kind of leaving it at the rule, like we do this, it's also adding the why. And it's also adding a lot of context in terms of real edits that we've made, what not to do, and what to do instead. So 22 chapters. We've probably covered about 5 aspects of chapters in this presentation today, but there is considerably more to say about our process, about things that we think about SEO, about formatting, about numbers, about links, about storytelling, about building a style guide in general. So definitely, if you enjoyed the presentation today, please check out my book. It is available for pre-order right now for Kindle, but on Monday, next Monday, it will also be available for print. So if you would prefer that, then the way that I've been told that you can get a reminder about that is you have to follow my author profile and then it'll tell you that, or you could add it to your wish list. So follow that short link if you're interested. And yeah, let's, I know we're kind of at the end of time here, but let's maybe take a few quick questions to wrap it up. So, yeah, Elena, do you have any particular ones you want me to focus on? I see one for sure about tone of voice that I can touch on.
Okay, thank you, Maddy. I found your presentation is extremely useful and engaging, and
Good.
it's time for a Q&A session. And we have some questions, and some people send them via emails, and also we have several questions from the chat. Let's start from the questions from the emails, and the first question is, what's the difference between SEO writing with content writing, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think the main difference is just with SEO writing, you're taking that research and data step where you're, you're really considering like what's already out there, competition, structure as far as like what these different SEO tools tell us we should be focusing on. And I'll tell you that even when we're doing a copywriting project that has nothing to do with SEO, we still do SEO research to understand the topic. So for me, it's almost like it's almost like there is no difference. That's oversimplifying things a little bit. They're definitely different, but there's parts of the process that are shared, at least for us at the Blogsmith, in both. And I think at the end of the day, you want to think about them as being similar because you want to be thinking about the human, right? And in either way, you're thinking about the robot with the SEO thing, but you should still always hold like the human in the highest regard for either of them.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And one more question. Does a content creator, I'm sorry, uh, does a content creator or marketer need to be skilled in tech skills like video editing, photo editing, and graphic design?
I feel like we're getting to a point where there's a lot of specialization. I will say that like in my career, I've had to touch on like learning all those different things. But now where I'm at right now and trying to run a company, I've hired people to help me specifically with those different things. So I don't know if that helps, but I think it's good to learn about everything. But then I think once you've exposed yourself to all the different options, figure out what you really like and what you're passionate about, and then like lean into that and focus on that.
Okay, great. It's good news. And let's turn to the questions from the chat. And yes, I saw the question. Yes, the question from Ekaterina. She asks, how can you keep your tone of voice through all materials on your blog? Should it be documented somehow?
So I think start by defining your tone of voice with those spectrums that I've shared, and then I think they do sometimes change for different mediums. Like my tone of voice might change a little bit for social media because social media is a more conversational platform, and so inevitably like language is just going to be different. I will say I don't have a lot of experience with what I'm going to tell you, but I know that Grammarly has an option within their tool to define tone of voice, and then it can kind of almost like let you know when you're deviating from that. And again, it's like a robot, right? So it's not going to be 100% accurate, just like Grammarly in general. You kind of have to take their suggestions with a grain of salt. I do want to, as we talk about Grammarly, address another question that I saw in the chat, which is from Ivana, about grammatical accuracy is so important, but what can we do at a small company? So my suggestion for that I forgot to mention in the presentation, especially when we were talking about like that WordPress with the capital P and the HubSpot and all that, is that we use another Grammarly tool. They have this style guide feature. And so you can input like common brands that you write about, common terms that you want written a certain way, and then Grammarly will serve up those little pop-ups like it does with any other grammatical suggestions it has, but you can customize them. And that's what we do at the Blogsmith. Every writer, every editor has a premium Grammarly license that connects to that same business account and then that same style guide. So that I think that's a great way to do it, because then you can get everyone on the same page and they're all seeing the same things.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Yeah. And I see a question from Unica. How can Serpstat help in content writing? I guess I can answer the question. It's a broad, a little question. And with Serpstat, you can analyze competitors' content, headings, and formats, and look for sites for guest posting, analyze authoritative donors, look for ideas for new content, optimize it, and add it to your content plan. Analyze trends, especially for media and news aggregators. Generate titles. It's our new tool. Find some traffic pages, organize effective internal linking, and so on. You can go through the links I've put here before in the chat, so I can duplicate it, and you can book a demo or reach out to our support. So okay, and let's turn to another question from Helen. Helen asks, what if I can't create my photos? I have an online store of stationery, but I don't have time to take photos.
Sure. Yeah. I'm not sure if I have a lot to say in your specific use case. So I used to run, I guess I still kind of do, a print on demand store. And I know like one of the things that really helped me is that the partner that I worked with had a lot of like mock-up generator type things, so that I didn't have to like go and like order, you know, every size, every product, and then take pictures of it. So, you know, depending on like your suppliers, like maybe they have some photos. You know, another thing that I did, and again, I don't know if this helps you, but like the print on demand store that I ran, it was about like funny, like things to do with like travel and like different like names of places that are kind of funny. And so like my husband and I, we would go on hikes and then we would just take pictures like with the merchandise to get some like lifestyle things. You know, we would reach out to like friends and, you know, give them maybe like a free product so that they would also create some other like user generated content. So I think user generated content is something to explore. But again, I think, you know, maybe think about some of those other visuals that you could use. Like maybe there are some funny GIFs of like people writing, you know, that you could kind of incorporate in the content you're creating. Or another thing that I've used in the past are tools like Lumen 5, which you kind of like take your blog post and then it creates like a video that you could share on social. And it uses AI to make it pretty easy. You still have to make some edits, but there are a lot of different ways that you can create content without necessarily like having a photo shoot. So again, I don't know if that helps in your specific use case, but just try to think about some of the ideas that I've brought up today, and if any of those are relevant to you, because I think probably some of them could be.
Okay, great. And one more question from Ekaterina. Do you think that in the future some software or technology could write and publish their content without human review?
Yeah, so I mean, we're definitely seeing, I think, the beginnings of that right now with GPT-3 tools. And it's something, it's a question that comes up whenever I talk about the like humans and robots and like the idea of content. So it's a really interesting one to think about. What I tell people is I don't think we're at a place yet where we have to worry about them coming for our jobs yet, because what robots currently lack is empathy, art direction, great formatting, and I think that tone of voice kind of factors in there too. Like you can get a GPT-3 tool to generate copy about some topic, but what you can't really do, as far as I know yet, is define like the tone of voice you want it to be in. So I think we still have a lot going for us as humans.
Yes, awesome.
But I think it's worth saying you should still play around with those tools, and I think they can be part of a good content creation process. You just don't want to like start and end with the robot. You have to still factor in that human aspect. You have to make some human edits.
Yeah, definitely. Great. And question from Anna. Hi, Maddy. I want to become a freelance writer sometime next year. Should I continue pushing even though I have no professional skills, or would a company hire me as a creative writer?
Sure. Yeah. So what I did, that I hope this helps you, is I wanted to write too. My degree was in marketing, which is related, but it wasn't like I didn't do journalism in college. You know, I didn't do creative writing. Like I lacked experience, we'll say. And so what I did was I created my own lifestyle blog. It was about when I used to live in Chicago, and it was about like deals and like events and things like that. And I just played around with it, and I just kind of, it was almost like a portfolio piece, you could say. And it allowed me to test out different things. And that's really how I fell in love with SEO. It was as a way to drive traffic to that blog, to prove that I could be a good marketer and I could be a good blogger. So whether it's like a blog like that about like some hobby you have, or maybe you just start kind of like a portfolio blog website about just, you know, various writing pieces, I think that's a really great way to build experience. And then, you know, those are kind of the initial pieces that you can share with companies so that they understand your writing style and your approach. So I hope that helps. And it's hard to get started in this kind of field, but I think it's all about just like continuing to be consistent. So even if it's hard at the beginning, if you keep pushing, then eventually you'll kind of get to the stage that you want.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And about a couple of questions left. So, question from Ivana. Hi, Maddy. Grammatical accuracy is so important, but what can we do at a small company? I'm not sure I can sound professionally to an English-speaking audience.
Yeah, so I think this is kind of what I was saying about that like Grammarly style guide feature. I think check that out for sure, because I think that really helps us at the Blogsmith to cut down on errors, especially if it's about, again, like the common brands we write about, the common topics, words, even like another example I can give is like the word ebook. Does it have a dash in it? Is the E capitalized or lowercase? Whatever it is for your team, define it and put it in something like the Grammarly style guide, and then it's just clear for anybody who writes about it.
Okay. Thank you. And can you share on what blogs you work on so that we could follow them and improve our styles from them? Thanks.
Perfect. Absolutely. Yeah. So check out the blogsmith.com/portfolio. And we share like some of our best work there. And it's also tagged by category. So you can kind of go in and find, whatever seems most relevant to you. And I'd also recommend, I think I have this in the slides, and I don't think I can add a comment myself here, but maybe if I send this to you, Elena, the link, I just sent it in our private chat. Check out the Blogsmith style guide. We do have like a public facing version of that. And I think that's another great way to just kind of learn about why we do things a certain way and all the rules. And then of course, check out the book too, which I have here. It's print proof. It's not the absolute final version, but the book again is kind of like all about these rules and why to write a certain way, and how to achieve consistency and quality. So between those things, I think there's a lot to dig into.
Great, thank you. And one more question. I think it will be the last question for today. The question from Helen. I'm thinking about hiring a content marketer. How to determine that he is a professional like you?
So I'll just tell you kind of what the Blogsmith does. Whenever we're hiring writers, really for any position, we have a job description that's like something that we've put a lot of time into crafting so that we're, first of all, setting expectations correctly with people. Because we do have a lot of processes and like tools we use. And I want people to be aware that like things do change. Like it's not like we don't stick with the status quo. It changes often. And so you have to be somebody who wants that. So it's about setting expectations. It's about communicating what we expect from them. And then the next step is there's an application that just asks some like pointed questions. Also, from the writer perspective, asking like, what's a piece that you wrote that you're really proud of? And also like, what's a piece that you wrote that you did a lot of research on? Because we're trying to understand like different ways that they approach different things. And then one other part of the application process is that we have an Easter egg in the job description where it says, it's kind of hidden in there, but it says, write "Hi, Maddy" somewhere on the application so that I know that you were paying attention. So we're kind of testing a couple of things before we even get to like sort of like an interview stage or whatever. And we don't necessarily do interviews. It's more of after they submit an application, and if we see a fit, then we assign a paid test. And for writers, we have 2 paid tests. The first one's kind of simple. And the second one's like, okay, so here's like more of the detail that we would be looking for if we hired you. And so having the 2 tests gives us a chance to see like legitimately, are they a fit for us? And it also gives them some exposure to our process to see if we're a fit for them. So I think, to kind of summarize here, it's like, know what you want, communicate that, be really thoughtful in how you test people, or even like the application side of things, and let those things be your guide. So don't just like operate off your gut. You have to kind of test people out. And then the last thing I'll say on that is all of our tests are paid. We don't believe in people doing free work for us. And likewise, we also don't believe in doing free work for clients. Like, we're always very straightforward about that. There have been some issues in the past where like things have been misinterpreted if we're doing like a test project or something, but we fully believe that everybody should be paid for their time. So it goes both ways.
Okay, great. And I think that that's all we have for now. So, friends, if you have any other questions, join our Serpstat Twitter channel. Serpstat chats are conducted there. It's a great opportunity to communicate with an SEO expert and get answers to your questions on a featured topic. You can also contribute your expertise there. We conduct the Serpstat chat regularly on Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time on our Twitter. Join our Google Calendar to make sure you won't miss our future Twitter chats and webinars. I'll put the link into the chat. One moment, please.
And I'll just say too, like, if you have any questions after this for me, I'm at Maddy Osman on Twitter. If there's any like resource that I mentioned today that you want access to, just let me know. I'm happy to share.
Oh, yes, great. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. There is no doubt that it was an awesome event. Guys, thanks for watching, for having questions, and for being here with us. In my point of view, we've learned a lot today. This was really fun. Cheers. Thank you. Have a great day, Maddy. Have a great week, guys. And let's meet again. See you. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.